Let's try that again. All right, Unit 7, we're going to talk about atmospheric pollution. In this first lesson, we're going to talk about specific air pollutants. You want to know the sources and effects of those air pollutants. For the effects, honestly, most of them will just be respiratory issues. So if that ever comes up in an FRQ, that's a really easy answer. To start off with, we have two different classifications of pollutants. A primary pollutant is something that's emitted directly from a source, whereas a secondary pollutant only forms in the atmosphere from the chemical reaction between two primary pollutants. As a general rule of thumb, the primary pollutants will be the simpler molecules, and the secondary pollutants are the more complicated molecules. That being said, it's not always the case, but it's just a generalization you can rely on if you really cannot remember. The criteria pollutants are so called because the EPA has set standards for the levels of these pollutants based on the health of humans and the health of the environment. It's not to say it's the only ones that should be regulated and the only ones that cause damage, but it's just 6 really, really big ones that they've put standards in place to minimize that damage. First up, we have nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide mainly results from the burning of fuel. And it's not from the fossil fuels themselves or whatever the fuel is, but it's the high heat conditions in, for instance, your engine that cause the nitrogen and oxygen to bond together. So even though it doesn't come from a fossil fuel, it's still the burning of fossil fuels that allows this to occur. It causes respiratory issues. Some issues that we have, it mixes with water, oxygen, and other chemicals in the atmosphere to form acid rain, specifically nitric acid. Another issue is that it leads to the formation of tropospheric ozone, also called ground level ozone because it's, on the ground. So ozone up in the higher in the atmosphere, that's good ozone. But down here, it's bad because it causes a lot of respiratory issues. It is a secondary pollutant because it's formed from NOx and volatile organic compounds reacting together in the presence of sunlight. So I want to back up and talk about this word NOx. So NOx, we abbreviate with an X because it could be either nitrogen monoxide or nitrogen dioxide. So the X is just letting us know that it could be a 1 or a 2. Volatile organic compounds are chemicals that vaporize really easily, so they can become a gas. So there's a lot of natural sources of VOCs, but a lot of unnatural sources, and we've seen this increase of tropospheric ozone. It causes respiratory issues. It's known as photochemical smog, or it's a major component of photochemical smog. It can harm sensitive vegetation. This is just showing the reaction. Next up, we have sulfur dioxide, also emitted by the burning of fossil fuels. So carbon and sulfur are very similar chemically. So every now and then during photosynthesis, plants will take in sulfur and use it in the same way as they do carbon. And so in fossil fuels has a lot of sulfur in it as well because of ancient plants taking in the sulfur dioxide and using it to make their plant stuff. It causes respiratory issues by itself. It is also a precursor of acid rain. It makes sulfuric acid in the atmosphere. Next, we have carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas. It results from incomplete combustion. Big issue with carbon monoxide is that it's an asphyxiant. So that means it binds to hemoglobin more strongly than oxygen, and so it doesn't allow the red blood cells to transport oxygen, and you suffocate if exposed to too much carbon monoxide for a long period of time. Lead used to result a lot from leaded fuel, but they have put in restrictions so that lead has been taken out of gasoline. There are some fuels you might still find it in the fuel. But for the most part, it comes from ore processing, lead smelting plants, waste incinerators, things like that. It is a neurotoxin, so it causes neurological damage and also causes cardiovascular damage and then just a whole other host of issues. That's very bad. It also comes from other sources like old pipes, used to be in paint, all those things. But we're talking about atmosphere and how it gets into the atmosphere. The final criteria pollutant is particulate matter. Particulate matter are just like little solid or liquid particles floating in the air. For example, dust, dirt, soot, smoke, things that come off of construction sites, dirt roads, smokestacks, fires, all sorts of stuff. Of course, it causes respiratory problems, and those respiratory problems get even worse the smaller the particles are. So the big particles, our upper respiratory system can get those particles out pretty easily. But if they're really, really small, they can get past all of our defenses and get way deep into the alveoli and cause the most damage. Some other ones you want to know, even though they're not criteria air pollutants, they are still, important because they're bad. There's mercury. The mercury results from the burning of coal as well. The issue with mercury is that it does not break down when organism consumes it. And so that means as it goes up the food chain, that predator is eating a whole bunch of prey that has that pollutant in it. And so the concentration increases as it goes up the food chain. So it's a really bad idea to eat a lot of really big fish that are high up on the food chain, especially pregnant women, because it increases the chances of being exposed to mercury. Mercury is another heavy metal that causes all sorts of damage. Volatile organic compounds, like I said, those are compounds that vaporize really easily. Those might be hydrocarbons from fuels, like the vapors coming off of gasoline, chemicals like solvents, paints, cleaners, aerosol sprays, building materials and furnishing, just a whole host of them. And it really just depends on, what, source, like what the source is. And like we all know, like that, like that smell, like a new car or new furniture and stuff like that. Like those smells, what you're smelling are volatile organic compounds. And like, so there are natural sources, but we're concerning ourselves with the unnatural sources. And finally, we have carbon dioxide. There's been a lot of, argument that carbon dioxide should be a criteria air pollutant because we should be moderating the amount of acceptable carbon dioxide that's emitted into the atmosphere. But that remains to be seen whether or not that will happen. So it is emitted from natural sources like respiration, volcanoes, all sorts of things. And that's what we've seen. We're going to go into more detail in the climate change unit, but we've seen a natural oscillation of carbon dioxide. But with our increased use of fossil fuels in the last couple of 100 years, we've seen that level skyrocket way past what's been historically acceptable. This Mauna Loa data in particular shows carbon dioxide, and we see like just this perfect increase. It's completely, like you can't deny, like it's increasing a lot. Again, way past what it's been in the past. Like I said, we'll talk more about that in climate change, but that is all for this unit.